It isn't only the high street of St Peter Port, Guernsey, that's hanging out the celebratory bunting. Guernsey's fund business is worth over £250 billion and has the wind in its sails as last year's last quarter delivered a 6% increase in the value of its investment funds. Therefore, it takes no great leap of the imagination to appreciate Guernsey has no intention of letting anything stop such growth in its tracks, least of all some unhelpful legislation blowing across the Channel from Europe. Yes, the Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directive, a label that flatly refuses to arrange itself into a snappy acronym, is the latest grizzly bear that a non-European finance centre like Guernsey has to confront. At this year's Guernsey Funds Forum, some 450 sector specialists gathered to mull over the island's chances of overcoming the directive's challenge of change. Do you think the Guernsey fund industry is ready to meet the challenge of change from the Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directive?
Yes, definitely. I think it's because we're appropriately regulated as opposed to any semblance of over-regulation.
I believe Guernsey is ready to do that. There's some actively involved dialogue with the regulators and governments in Europe and Belgium. I believe so.
Yes, it is. And Guernsey has survived on change, and the AIFM is just yet another challenge, but we're well placed for it. We're on the doorstep of Europe, but we're not part of it, and that gives us that added advantage.
Guernsey's always been in a position to go with the regulators' changes internally as well as any challenges given to them from overseas, like the UK, for instance, on tax regimes and the fact that how the funds in Guernsey are going to deal with it. Guernsey's very adaptive and always will be.
Does the Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directive pose a threat, challenge or competitive boost for Guernsey's fund industry?
Well, it's a very interesting question because I think the directive in its present form is significantly better than where it was 3 years ago when it was first released. It's certainly a lot more friendly towards the industry, and I think for third countries such as Guernsey, it certainly is a challenge. There's a lot of work that still remains to be done, but on the whole I think it does give Guernsey an advantage in the medium to long term. The beauty of the directive as it's presently drafted is that it allows for private placement to continue to exist, but also there's the prospect of a passport becoming available for third countries down the track. If you're looking at us as a jurisdiction, the criteria are fairly straightforward. They are that you've got to have anti-money laundering standards in place, you've got to have OECD compliant tax information exchange agreements, and you have to have regulatory cooperation agreements. So Guernsey, by any objective measure, meets those criteria. So in that sense we're very well positioned. But because the private placement regime exists in parallel, it allows fund managers to structure their funds to suit their investors. So if you have a fund that doesn't require marketing throughout Europe, you can use Guernsey as a private placement regime. If you want access to the passport, then Guernsey, when that becomes available, will be at the head of the queue because of our regulatory background. So I think it does give Guernsey some confidence over the coming years for its fund sector. I also think that it's a challenge in some respects because while we know what the first directive, the Level 1 directive says, we're currently going through the process of developing Level 2, which are the implementing provisions, and there are going to be about 100 new regulations coming out over the next 12 to 18 months, fleshing out how the directive is going to work in practice. And it's very important for Guernsey to be engaged with the European Securities and Markets Authority and the European Commission to continue to argue the case, because we have a lot of expertise in this field. We've regulated these funds for a long time, we understand the industry, so we can contribute positively to that process over the next 12 to 18 months, which we intend to do.
I think as being one of the Channel Islands, Guernsey is very well placed initially due to its ability to work under UK law as well as the proximity to Europe. I mean, in fact, it is part of Europe, and I think that gives it a very good starting position. Guernsey has also, like the Channel Islands, engaged very actively during this whole process and has made it very clear that they want to be an accepted partner to the EU, and looking into the dialogue and the setting up of the joint Channel Islands office. That said, I think Guernsey also needs to continue to work with professionalizing the industry, training the people that are involved, that are working for the finance industry, and perhaps also being a little bit more open to bringing in additional managerial capacity from outside to continue to professionalize the industry if it also expects it to grow, because fund managers will look towards that. And I think another matter that is also very important is that continue to work on setting all the cooperation agreements in place so that fund managers based in the island do not have to put, for example, a Luxembourg holding company in between when wanting to invest into one or the other country.
John, can you tell us a little bit more about your views on Guernsey's capabilities as a regulator for offshore funds?
Actually, I can hardly speak too highly of them. It's not something I do very often. I'm naturally a critical sort of soul. The place is high integrity, sensibly regulated to keep itself internationally competitive. Taxes are straightforward. People are mostly honest, effective, and reasonably priced. It's a really good place to do investment business. And I really hope it remains so, and I think it will. They've got the right basics in every respect.
And their capabilities in meeting the challenge of the Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directive?
Well, the Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directive is the advanced course for anybody. Nobody will get it right. If they get 6 out of 10 right, they'll actually be probably the world leaders. The complexity of the damn thing exceeds anything that human beings have tried before. Guernsey is trying to approach it sensibly, but actually, when it's nonsense underlying it, you can only deal so far with it.